Hello, folks. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. My name is Roy Bensby, and I'm your host. And I want to explain a little bit about the podcast before we start the show this week. This podcast is an opportunity for me to speak with some of the most interesting people I know that I can find on the internet. So, either with amazing talents or achievements or just unbelievable life stories or invaluable insights into areas that they have dedicated their lives to studying. I sit down with these amazing individuals from all across the world. Really, I've talked to people from Slovenia to the Czech Republic to Australia to countries in Africa and South America, really just all over the world. And I try to ask them the questions that will hopefully help you extract something valuable or learn something new or just get inspired by. And I do hope that you do get inspired by these talks with some sort of a call to action, maybe change something that you wanted to change for a while, or even just enjoy, detaching from the world for an hour and listening to some great conversations. So whatever it is that you get from this, I do hope that you extract something from it and enjoy the conversations. All these episodes are available on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google, and the rest of them. You can also find the episodes on my website, which is roybensv.com. You can find a lot of other information about me there as well, from photos to a little bit more insights into who I am, if you're interested. And, you can always go to social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there. I'm pretty active on both those platforms, although the only ones I have. And I try to post regularly so you can stay up to date. And also be sure to put your email on the website. I shoot emails out with updates, news, any new current information that I have will be sent via those emails and social media platforms. So yeah, make sure you're in the loop. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This week on the episode, we have Konstantin Kisin, who is a Russian-British comedian, podcaster, writer, and social commentator. He made international headlines back in 2018 by refusing to sign a university behavioral agreement form, which banned jokes about religion, atheism, and insisted that all humor must be respectful and kind, which is a little bit counterintuitive since the whole point of stand-up and humor is to push boundaries, is to do social commentary, is to make people maybe feel uncomfortable. And according to him, he's not even an offensive comedian. He just doesn't want to be stifled. He just doesn't want other people dictating to him what he can and can't say. And I 100% agree with that. You should be able to say whatever you want to say without anybody harassing you or threatening to cancel you or to arrest you, which they are essentially doing over in England. People have gotten arrested for saying mean things or jokes that are not very funny or tasteful. So it's a thin line right now. He also hosts the show, the podcast Triggernometry. It's on YouTube. You can find it. I believe they have weekly episodes. It's a great podcast / YouTube show. So we cover a lot of different topics on this episode. Anything from cancel culture, free speech, safe spaces, how he kind of rose to prominence, how social media is dividing us, how the media is dividing us. And it's a fun one. It's not a podcast for the people who are looking for safe spaces. This is an open platform for open conversations on all topics. Always happy to talk with anyone about everything as long as it's a good faith conversation and we're really trying to talk about something rather than squashing or destroying or dismantling the other side for their quote unquote wrong opinions. I really enjoyed Konstantin's point of view, argument, and just conversation. It was a really fun conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you guys do as well. So without further ado, here is this week's guest, Konstantin Kisin. Enjoy the episode, guys.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Hey, Konstantin, how you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm great.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I've been following you and people of your ilk. There's like a group, an emerging group of people right now that are, I don't know if they're in the common sense section of the political aisle and social commentators, but there's a group and you're one of them. And I'm happy to have you, and hopefully I can have some other people in the future. So thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. No problem at all.
So yeah, before we get into all the craziness of what is currently going on, maybe if we can know a little bit about you, what's, your background, where were you born?
So my name is Konstantin. I was born in the Soviet Union about 9 or 10 years before it collapsed and became modern Russia. That's where I grew up initially as a kid. And then when I was about 13, my parents sent me to school here in England, where I live now and have lived since. And I had a sort of life that went in many different directions, but I ended up being a comedian. I started comedy about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. And after a few years of being in comedy, I started to notice a sort of creeping, what you might call hypersensitivity combined with an obsession about, restricting what people can and can't say. And it culminated in me being offered to perform at a college or university here in London. And when they invited me to perform there, having already seen me in a comedy club and liked all my stuff, they sent me a contract which said that they had a zero tolerance policy on racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism. And it also said that all jokes must be respectful and kind.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I'd love to go to a show like that.
Yeah, it sounds great, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that became a huge international news story. It was covered in every major newspaper in the UK, BBC News, ITV, everywhere. I appeared on Tucker Carlson, on Fox News, and equally lots of left-wing sort of shows and publications as well. So it became a very big story. And I think it became a big story for reasons that didn't have anything to do with me, but to do with the fact that a lot of people now feel that our ability to express ourselves openly, to have political views and other views in the public domain is increasingly being curtailed. People are punished for speaking out. We have numerous people in the UK who've been arrested and some even prosecuted for making comments online, for questioning, let's say, certain aspects of trans ideology or whatever. And they literally get a knock on the door and the police say, we need you to go down to the police station and do an interview. We had a case just like this literally last week where a commentator who does a podcast very much like I do with Triggernometry, he had a controversial guest on the show who'd made some ill-judged remarks to do with race. But they were ill-judged. He wasn't, advocating for racial genocide or anything like that. He just made some badly worded remarks about a racial issue. And that happened a few months ago. The guy who said it got canceled pretty hard, which many people agreed with at the time. But what happened last week was both the person who said it and the interviewer were asked to attend a police interview, and the police said it's a voluntary interview, and the small print was you're invited to attend this voluntary interview. If you don't attend, you'll be arrested.
So the guy that was interviewing the guy got in trouble as well, just for interviewing him and allowing him to express his thoughts, however misguided that they were.
Exactly.
That's insane. So because in the UK you don't have free speech laws like in the US, right?
No.
Like it's not in the amendment. It's not protected.
We don't have a First Amendment which enshrines your right in some kind of constitution. We don't have a written constitution. And so what has happened over the last 10 to 15 years particularly is that we've started to see more and more laws introduced to restrict what people can and can't say. They've made offense a crime. They've also made offense a subjective thing. So let's say that I'm walking down the street and someone bumps into me and we have some kind of disagreement and he tells me to go fuck myself. I can report him for a racially motivated hate crime because I can say it's because I'm Jewish or it's because I'm an immigrant and he was being bigoted against me. And that would have to be recorded as a hate incident, even if he was never prosecuted, the guy was never convicted. That would still go down in the hate crime statistics. So we've seen this massive creep, which I consider very authoritarian, particularly given where I come from. Many of my relatives in the Soviet Union were dissidents against the Soviet regime. So to me, the idea that you're going to be punished in the West, which I thought was this beacon of freedom, for things that you say in a similar way to the way my grandparents were punished for saying what they thought in the Soviet Union. To me, that's just incredible.
Yeah, and for me, it always seemed like in the US, everyone is super sensitive and hypersensitive, and then it's just getting more and more sensitive. And I always looked at the Brits as these. I actually looked at it the opposite. I was like, the Brits, they always take the piss out of themselves. Like, if you look at the movies, the comedy, it's always very self-deprecating, and you take the piss out of themselves. And here, no, like, if you look at the hero here, it's always the guy that gets the girl, right? And he's the one who saves the world. And in England, it's this loser, and he's always the protagonist of the movie. But now you're saying that's going in a completely opposite direction. Like, if you say anything to anyone, you could potentially get arrested, which at least luckily here, this is not something that regularly or at all happens.
Yeah. Well,
you think that kind of behavior is going to disappear over there?
Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you. What was the last part of your question?
If you think this culture of taking the piss out of mates, out of your friend, out of other people, will that disappear? Is that going away?
I think on that level, people are still, joking around with their friends and stuff like that. But it's more a question of what can happen in the public space. And in the public space, everyone is now super sensitive, because not only will you be socially punished, you might even be punished under the law. So we're very jealous of America and the fact that in America, you guys have the freedom to speak enshrined in the Constitution. And where you stand. In this country, increasingly, you don't know where you stand, and it's a big concern.
Do you think it's a case of, I forget which guest, but a guest told me this, that when the US sneezes, the rest of the world gets the flu. And it's a case of, in England, maybe this wasn't the case, but because they've seen what's happened in the US, and because of political unrest and social unrest and everything that's happening on Twitter, the UK has kind of adopted it as like, oh, okay, whatever's going on there, it's going on here. We should try to implement, even though you don't necessarily have the same problems, the same history, but young people just trying to do a copy paste over from what's going over in the US.
Yeah, that's 100% what's happening. If you think about even the George Floyd case, which has obviously had repercussions around the world. We had massive protests and even riots in this country about it. That's a perfect example of that, where in this country, or in America, there is the issue of policing and race, obviously very controversial. Different people have different views, but you have the issue of some black men unarmed being shot by police officers. In the UK, we had one person from an ethnic minority background who was shot and killed by the police last year in the whole year. And that person was Usman Khan, who had just stabbed a number of people in a terrorist attack on London Bridge here in the heart of London. And he was shot and killed, right? So we don't routinely have that issue. And yet the response was as if it had happened here, and it's a massive issue. Not to say that we don't have certain problems with policing and race and all that sort of thing, but it's not the same issue. It's not the same history. It's not the same. It's absolutely the case that we import all the good stuff from America, and with that comes a lot of shit as well.
Yeah. Because I think the cops in the UK, they don't even have guns, right?
We have some very small minority who carry their firearms, trained officers, and they carry firearms, but they are dispatched to very specific incidents where firearms are needed. So we don't have the kind of what we call a bobby on the beat, just a patrolling police officer walking around with a pistol or any other kind of weapon on their hip. We don't have that issue at all in the same way.
Brits have the best they have the best names for stuff. I love that. So I guess all of this kind of prompted you to start the podcast, or is that something you were already thinking on, you're already doing beforehand?
So Triggernometry, the show that we do, it's a YouTube show and podcast. We started it 2.5 years ago, which was probably about half a year before my contract that I turned down that became the huge story. So it predates that because we were already starting to feel quite strongly, me and my co-host Francis Foster, who's another comedian, about all of this stuff that was happening. And so we started it sort of simultaneously, you might say.
Okay. And have you had any jokes? I mean, for the whole issue that you had, but did you have any specific jokes that you got in trouble for?
No, because this is the one thing that got lost in the whole conversation is I never really thought of myself as a particularly offensive comedian. I played the normal comedy clubs, the normal comedy circuit. I never had any complaints about my material, people saying that I'm too offensive or anything like that. Now, to me, it was much more an issue of principle. But equally, I was starting to sense that we are living in a very different space. And I think it's largely down to social media, where in the past, if you didn't like a joke, or even the comedian making that joke in a comedy club, well, what you did is you'd go to the toilet or you go to the bar or you just sit there and not laugh and wait 5 minutes until the next comedian was on. Now you're starting to see people make complaints, demand for the comedian not to be booked again. We had an incident in a comedy club here the other day where someone took issue with something that was being said on stage. The woman jumped on stage, started sort of making her way towards the comedian. He stuck his arm out to keep the distance because you never know who this person is or what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And then she accused him of assaulting her and called the police on the comedian for that.
Jesus.
Right? So you're starting to see that. And also I was just starting to see in terms of my material, you know, being a dark skinned, people obviously can't see this, but I have sort of olive skin, a dark skin immigrant in this country. Race was always something I found very interesting. So I would have routines about race or my experience of someone being racist to me. And I would see the other people from minority backgrounds laughing their heads off and all the white people clenching their assholes and looking around for a black guy to give them permission to laugh at the joke.
Yeah.
You know, and again, you know, most of my material there was nothing sort of super edgy about it. I'd be talking about, let's say, how we need a special Olympics for white people, right? The premise being white people are terrible at, you know, they never end up in the Olympic 100-meter final, for example, right?
Yeah.
And I'd have this whole bit about, you know, why are people so surprised at me saying that? You know, we have the Paralympics, right? Why not the Pale Olympics? Right. and I was really coming at it from a point of, you know, emphasizing that, you know, white people are not good at some things, right? That should be theoretically a very quote unquote progressive woke routine. But people were tensing up about it. And I just felt that we were moving in this direction where we were so hypersensitive that we were no longer able to tell the difference between a joke about race and a joke that's racist or that's insensitive or that's inappropriate. People, particularly younger people, would tense up. And I just thought there's something very rotten going on here.
Yeah. I mean, that's a vanilla joke, pardon the pun, compared to like some of the stuff that's out there. That's not offensive in the slightest. But do you know, I mean, safe space for comedy is kind of like a booze-free bar, right? Like these things just, they don't make sense. You have to have that. Do you think it's, I guess the question is, do you think it's the best time right now to be a comedian or the worst time now? Because a lot of comedians like yourself are getting a lot of attention because people are craving that kind of raw edginess that maybe some other comedians are afraid to speak up or perform. So do you think it's a better time or a worse time?
It really depends. Well, first of all, we should say we're in the middle of a pandemic, so every comedy club in this country is now closed. So from that perspective, not a great time for comedy. But in terms of the rest of it, I think there's two different things. In this country, I don't know what it's like in America, but if you are not already super established internationally as a brand, someone like Ricky Gervais, Jimmy Carr, Frankie Boyle, people like that who are superstars, certainly in this country, who do offensive material. If you are one of them, you're fine because you've got the reputation, the contacts, the agent, the whatever. But if you're a newer comedian coming through, you're working your way up the circuit, you will never, ever be on TV if there's anything about your material that even feels in any way slightly edgy. That's the direction that it's gone in. So from that perspective, obviously, if you want to be on TV, it's a pretty bad time. At the same time, if you don't need that, if you build your audience through the internet, then it's a great time because, as you say, when people are starved of a particular thing, they're desperate for more of it, and they'll search for it and they'll look out for it. So it's a mixed bag on that front.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, even Andrew Schultz, right? I personally didn't know who he was last year. And now he's a megastar on the internet. You know, he's got a YouTube channel with, I think, like 1 million subscribers, and his Instagram is blowing up. And he said, like, you know, no one on TV, no one wanted to put me on TV.
Right.
So I just built my own brand. I think he invested like 20K in a studio, brought a group of funny people. And I mean, I personally love their show. And, you know, I know a lot of other people too. So that is the leverage that the internet brings you, affords you.
Yeah, and in that way, I think we're very, very fortunate. I think 20 years ago, you didn't have that luxury. You either went through the system or you didn't. You didn't go anywhere. Now we have the ability to circumvent the gatekeepers, and it's the same with podcasting and everything else. If you have a show that people are interested in, then it doesn't matter if you're not on TV or on the radio or whatever. It doesn't matter what agency picks you up and tries to push you or doesn't. It doesn't matter what any person in power thinks about it. As long as you produce the content and your audience like it, you can make whatever you want. And that's the great privilege of the time that we live in, to have that freedom, which I really appreciate, because without it, I'd certainly be screwed.
Yeah. As long as you know some social media marketing and some SEO, you should be fine.
I don't know either, but
yeah, I don't know too well, but I know a few people that are experts in it. It's just, yeah, I wish I knew it better. At what point did you think comedy turned from just comedy, just being that, just stand up, making people laugh, to social commentary? Because nowadays it seems like people get their news, or maybe not even their news, but at least
their opinion.
Yeah, perspective, right? An analysis of the daily media frenzy from comedians. They have become the mouthpiece for what is happening. But I don't think that was always the case. Like, at what point do you think that kind of turned? Maybe George Carlin? Or?
I mean, I think a lot of people sort of criticize that, and I suppose it depends what part of it you're talking about. But I actually really like political comedy, and I don't even have to agree with the comedy if it's funny. I don't have to agree with the underlying premise. In fact, one of the strongest indicators that a comedian is good is that you can laugh at their jokes even if you don't agree with the underlying premise. And, you know, there's a long history of, I mean, it depends what you mean by political. If you mean sort of, you know, Republicans are great, Democrats are bad, or Democrats are great, Republicans are bad, maybe there wasn't too much of that. But in terms of sort of the broader political and cultural issues, you know, there were always people like Bill Hicks, George Carlin, and others who I always admired and grew up watching, who were quite explicit about what they thought. They weren't just like, hey, I'm a fat guy, you know, let's talk about how fat I am. They had opinions and they expressed them. And I love that kind of comedy. I absolutely do. What I think we've seen in the last 4 years since Trump and Brexit in our country is everything is now political in that sort of tribal sense, where you're no longer joking about some kind of cultural issue. You're taking a side, and you're seeing it with, you know, with the TV shows, the late shows in America, for example, where it's all sort of just propaganda for one side of the argument. And worst of all, it's not really that funny. The problem is that, and this is true of many shows in this country as well, is they've not really invested all that much time and energy into making things funny. And what they've done instead is they've leaned into the political. And it's like a sugar-free yogurt or whatever. They've taken the sugar out, which you actually enjoyed, and they've just pumped it full of some other kind of crap that no one wants. But it is addictive at the same time, right? And so it's kind of like that. You've drained all the good stuff out of it, and you've replaced it with this unending propaganda, which even people who agree with it increasingly find quite boring.
Yeah, the problem with Trump is that it's not that even what he does, it is that you have to be on a certain side, right? Like his supporters are going 100% full MAGA all the time. Like he could, like he said, he could shoot someone on Fifth Ave and, they'd find an excuse, self-defense. And on the other side, it doesn't matter. He could find a cure for, AIDS, cancer, like everything. And they just wouldn't, no, he's not allowing, they'd find something to pin on him that would be
they'd
his
say, but why didn't he have enough black lesbians in the team that found the solution or whatever? They'd find a way, right?
It wasn't diverse enough. The team wasn't diverse enough. Yeah,
exactly. So, and that's how the game is played now, and I think it's tragic, and I think it's terrible for America. And as you said, we are downstream of you guys, so it's terrible for us as well, and it's terrible for the whole world.
Yeah. Where do you think this is a bit of I guess, most people maybe won't be as interested, but when I look at it through the lens of also an immigrant. I've been in this country 7 years, and also someone who's from Israel, Jewish, which there's a weird place that Jewish people are in, right? Just as an example, if you take Gal Gadot, I don't know if you saw the whole situation with her. She was cast to play Cleopatra, who is not Egyptian, by the way, is Greek. And all the social justice warriors took to Twitter, calling her anything from a dumb white bitch to a Zionist piece of shit. I hope you die. Just horrific war criminal, colonizer. Really the most vile things you can say.
Isn't social media great?
It's amazing, yes. And for the fact that she got an opportunity to play a role in a movie, all of this is, it's not like a real thing. It's a movie. It's fake. And people are just frothing at the mouth. And I just think it really boils down to the fact that they don't like Jews. They don't like Israelis. They don't like Gal Gadot. But this wouldn't be acceptable for anybody else, right? But because it is a Jewish lady, it's kind of okay to be attacked by the left, and it's okay to kind of be attacked by the right as well.
Well, it's the Jewish way, isn't it? We're never liked by either side. But I'm not sure. Look, I don't know enough about that particular story to say that it's because she's Jewish. I try as much as possible to stay away from any sort of victimhood narrative as I can. So I'm not a big fan of, it's because she's Jewish, or we Jews are oppressed, or whatever. But what I do agree with you on it is that because of the way this whole identity politics thing works and the pyramids of oppression work, the way it works is basically if your ethnic group is struggling, it's not doing well economically, it's not doing well in terms of representation in positions of power, then you are considered oppressed. And if your group has done well, then you are the oppressor by definition. Even though I think if people are honest with themselves and they're to look around and go, what is the most historically discriminated, oppressed, marginalized, genocided group of people in history? Well, Jews, I think.
Yeah,
Jews would be right up there, wouldn't they? But because Jews have managed to overcome that, then they're not included. And you're seeing it. It's not just Jews. You're seeing it with Asian Americans now as well, who are being discriminated against in university admissions because they do well, right? Yeah. And no one goes, well, the reason they do well, same reason as Jews, by the way, is that they work hard. They have a culture of education in their community. They have a culture of being academic, and they teach their children and basically force their children to be good at academia, right? That's why they do well in academia. That's why they then go on to make lots of money. And that's why they're then successful. So the problem with this whole way of looking at things is essentially if you say we punish groups for being successful, well, Jews are always going to be punished by the left, who don't like them because they don't fit that narrative. And, the far right never were big fans of Jews either. That's kind of, we always that little piggy in the middle.
Yeah. And I think that's why originally when I came to this country, I was very far left because, I knew that it's almost, you see where you're not liked and you're not welcomed and you go to the other side. And then, but slowly I was like, wait a minute, it's, with AOC, this, I think it was like a week ago where she didn't want to go to the Yitzhak Rabin. I mean, the most progressive guy, right? And he died for freedom and all that, but that wasn't progressive enough for her.
Well,
So the whole thing is just
Israelis are
insanity.
oppressors, man. She said it in one of her very first interviews where it was clear she doesn't have a clue. She couldn't find Israel on a map. But
Yeah,
she had a
it
very,
is hard to be clear.
yeah,
To be fair,
and it
yeah.
keeps changing, right, as well. All the time.
Yeah.
You never know where the border quite is. But um, my point is, in that interview, she didn't really seem to know what she was talking about. But what she said when challenged on that issue, she said, "Well, I'm always on the side of the oppressed, and if Israel is more powerful than the Palestinians, it doesn't matter what the historical context of that is, because whoever is winning is the oppressor. And that's how these people think. And that's why I don't even think they particularly have anything specific against Jews beyond that, really. It's just we don't fit the narrative."
Yeah. The funny thing is if you look at historically, right? Like if you look at the Jews that were expelled from the Arab nations after 48, right? Like the Middle East, Northern Africa, you're talking about millions of Jews. They expelled them from those countries. They were killed. They left all their possessions behind. They're essentially refugees from those countries. They came to Israel, but because they have a homeland, they're not looked at as refugees. But if you look at the outside, if you look at just outside of the Israel Palestine, if you look at Israel as being this little country in the Middle East where almost all the countries are its enemies and have been for decades talking about its destruction, then you start to maybe flip that script and say like, okay, maybe these guys aren't the oppressed, maybe they're, maybe not the oppressors, maybe they are the oppressed, right? And now we felt like, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about Trump, that they can never give him something good. And I'm not a Trump fan by a mile. I don't like Trump in the slightest. But when he did something good, right, he made peace with 2 Arab nations in that area. Peace is always good, but they couldn't give him that. They just couldn't give him that. And it's just such a weird situation. Like whenever I read stories about this, I'm like, they can't see the common sense beyond their, I don't want to say bigotry. Bigotry is a bad word, but they can't see the common sense there because they have all these veils of oppressed and all this other stuff. It just,
And they're blinded by
frustrating.
hatred towards Donald Trump as well.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking was there's a situation now where everyone is using the term Nazi very, very flippantly. And anything that doesn't suit them, it's a Nazi, right? You can be Black Nazi, Jewish Nazi. You can be every kind of Nazi there is. There's really quite a diverse group of Nazis out there. And, it's kind of like when everyone's called a genius or a hero. They have ads for Amazon workers calling them heroes. And while I appreciate what they do, they're not heroes. They're not the same as people fighting in Iraq or people on the front lines or firefighters. And I just feel like when you call everybody something, kind of waters it down, right? The word loses its meaning. And it's also kind of disrespectful to for at least for people that suffered from Nazis to call someone who just said something that's maybe not politically correct a Nazi.
Oh, I agree with you completely. This is a process that's been happening, particularly in the last 4 years, where the meaning of certain terms, Nazi, alt-right, etc., they've been diluted and misused those words so much that it's very hard to know what they mean anymore. And of course, as you say, given that Nazis actually existed and what they were, and that they committed horrible atrocities, it is a travesty that the memories of those people and the experiences of those people are being essentially compared now to someone who said something edgy on the internet, right? Like that as if there's some kind of moral equivalence between the two. It's a very easy way to slander your opponents, to slander people who don't agree with you. But the problem is it has a long-term impact, which we're now seeing in your country, in the United States, whereby certain people on the far left have spent 4 years calling everyone they don't agree with a Nazi, to the point where there are now people on the streets that actually believe they're fighting Nazis, actual Nazis. And as a result of that, they feel entitled to use violence. And the polls and the research very clear on this. The latest poll shows that up to 36% of both Republicans and Democrats now believe that violence is justified to achieve their political goals in the United States. So if I believed, as some of these people believe, that Nazis are literally on my doorstep, well, of course I'd be on the street protesting, doing everything I could to stop it, because an actual Nazi invasion would be the worst thing imaginable. And so this delusion that's been perpetrated on the public has long-term impact, which we're now seeing.
Yeah. And, I think about free speech a lot. For example, should there be parameters? Should there be limits to free speech? For example, should we allow Nazis to march down the streets, kind of like they did in, I think it was Louisville, Charlottesville. Yeah. Should that be allowed? Should we allow people to, inciting violence is illegal regardless, but are there borders? Should there be borders?
Well, my take on it is, I think inciting not just violence, but any crime, encouraging people to commit a crime should be illegal, right? So if I organize a rally to, evade taxes illegally, well, that should be illegal because I'm encouraging people to commit illegal actions. But apart from that, my preference would be just to let people speak. And the answer to that is you challenge them with more speech. You call them out and whatever. In terms of protesting and marching, etc., it's a little bit more complex, but you do have a freedom of assembly. And as long as you're not hurting people, as long as there's no violence, my preference would be to let these people who I loathe and completely disagree with and condemn and think are vile, for them to be allowed to do that. I don't think driving them underground helps. I think it makes things worse. And I think you will start to see that not allowing people to express their horrendous opinions doesn't make them not have horrendous opinions. It only confirms what they already believe, that, the Jews are behind it all or whatever, and, whatever it is that they believe.
Yeah. Do you think we would be where we are right now without Twitter? I mean, I feel like we're as divided as we've been in a very long time. And it could be that, I don't know, people staying indoors and COVID and people losing their jobs and just, I don't know, maybe there's starting to be a little stir crazy inside the house and they're just looking for an outlet. But I don't remember in my lifetime, people being as divided as we are right now. And I mean, I have to think it has to be social media. Like, I just don't see any other thing that would make us and the problem is it's the incentive is there for them to keep doing this, right? Like, there's no incentive for it to change at any point. It's not like, next year they're going to change their financial models and they're not going to do this. It's just, I feel like the divide's just going to keep growing and growing. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think social media is a big part of it in terms of accelerating processes that were already underway. What I would add to that, however, is I think both Trump in your country and Brexit in mine are symptoms of something else too, which is that essentially our elite institutions, what we might refer to as the establishment, the media, the political class, the people who control financial institutions, they no longer listen to the views of ordinary people. And they served their own interests and ignored the interests of the public. And as a result of that, the public were almost forced to vote for things that actually they didn't necessarily want. A lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump would not have voted for him had the situation not been the way that it was. In the UK, for example, Brexit wasn't just about leaving the European Union for Britain. A large part of it was people's frustration that democratically they could no longer control important aspects of British policy. They could not democratically vote for people to parliament and to become prime minister who would reflect their views, let's say, on immigration. Now, British people are very tolerant, welcoming towards immigrants. I know this for myself. But a large wave of mass immigration in a short period of time can be unsettling to many people. And people felt that, rightly or wrongly, if they expressed that view, it was socially frowned upon because the so-called chattering classes that we have, the sort of wine-drinking metropolitan elite, they were unprepared to listen to that. They would just dismiss them as bigoted, racists, whatever. And also politically, we had no way of controlling the borders because we're part of the European Union. So I think, of course, social media plays a huge role, but there was a massive underlying problem even before social media really kicked off, which is a widespread feeling that the elite is no longer acting in the interest of the whole country. They're shipping jobs overseas. They're allowing levels of immigration that many people felt were disruptive to their communities, that were unsustainable, and so on and so forth. So I think it's partly about social media accelerating the divisions, but it's also about the fact that many, many people for decades felt that they could not have their voice heard.
I struggle with Twitter / real life dilemma sometimes, because when I go on Twitter, it seems like the world is just going up in flames. Anywhere you look, any country, any subject, it doesn't look good, and it's a lot of people bickering and fighting. But when I see my neighbor across the street, and when I go to the grocery store, and when I talk to friends, outside of COVID, obviously, which isn't good, most things are normal, and we're talking about normal topics, and they're kind of normal people, and everything's pretty normal. But then you go on Twitter again, and it's like, oh no, the world's going down. And then you leave Twitter, and it's like normal again. And I almost don't know which one is real anymore. You know what I mean? Like, where am I living? It's such I don't know. It's a mind fuck.
I know what you mean, and it's a good point you make. I think Twitter is a sort of slightly advanced version of the future, in that you get to see it a little bit earlier, because what you're seeing on Twitter is essentially a reflection of how that part of society feels, and the battles that are happening there. Now, of course, when you go outside, people aren't bickering with each other in the streets or smashing each other over the head over their political opinions yet. But I mean, think about this, in 1933, would most Germans in Germany feel that something dramatic was happening, that their life was being dramatically overturned, that things were somehow so different to what they've seen before? Probably not, I would imagine, right? They would have gone outside and bought their sausages and sauerkraut and whatever else. Not really feeling like society was fraying at the edges, or there was this great wave of terror coming or whatever. But as we know, within a few years, that's exactly what happened. So the fact that you now go out across the street and buy groceries without anything major happening, I don't think is necessarily a reflection of where we're going. So I totally understand the desire of most people to just get their head down, get on with life, raise their children, go to work, whatever. But I don't think this battle that we're in now is one that anyone is going to be able to sit out in the long term.
Do you think we can exist? And exist, we can obviously exist. I mean, in the sense that if I am a person that wants to be independent or an entrepreneur or build any business, can I be offline? Can I shut down my social media? Can I close my YouTube account? It's almost like it's this paradox where sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm sick of this. Like, I don't think this is healthy. But on the other hand, like, you have to be on there, right? Like, it's almost like food in a sense. Like, I can't go on without food. I have to have food. And this is the same type of thing. This is on par.
Right. I mean, you can go off the grid, but like you say, your options are then very limited. So for people like us who create content and want to entertain people, if I didn't have to be on social media, I wouldn't be. Or I would be on certain ones and very limited, and not probably just put out what I want to say and not really interact too much with other people. But that ain't the way the world works. And I think we're all trying to work out how to reap the huge benefits of the existence of social media, which there are. They're incredible. I love Twitter because there's 50,000 people who follow me with whom I can have conversations, who are interested in what I have to say. That's amazing. It's incredible. But at the same time, as you said, there's a lot of downsides. And I think as a society, we haven't really yet worked out how to find that healthy balance.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely a lot of, and this is something I struggle with, and it's one of those things where something can be good and bad at the same time.
Right.
And, if I personally love dogs, I love animals. And as far as animals and animal welfare, social media has been absolutely amazing. Like, I think they've made more strides in the last 10, 20 years than in the last 100, right? But then, like you said, on the other things where it's spreading the misinformation and disinformation and dividing cultures, and I just don't know if I had to weigh it on a scale, pluses and minuses. I think overall there would probably be more minuses than pluses, especially for certain, like especially maybe for Twitter and maybe for some of the other ones that don't have as much because Instagram and I don't have Facebook, so I don't know about Facebook. I know the Instagram, like you're limited with what you can post. It's not that type of social platform, but Twitter is a free for all pretty much. Although they have started to put some restraints recently.
Well, yes. And in fact, only yesterday, there was a story
Yeah.
about the New York Post publishing an article that was that contained disparaging revelations about Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, and Twitter prevented people from sharing it. So that's the big battle that's coming down the pipeline is big tech. Are they publishers or are they platforms? And that will be a huge battle that needs to be fought because right now they're trying to have their cake and eat it. They're claiming that they're a platform where anyone can publish what they want, except the moment someone's post something they don't approve of, they censor it and prevent it from being shared. Even though they were perfectly happy, I'm someone who's bang in the center, and if you're bang in the center politically, it's very easy to see the double standards at play. When the Covington MAGA kids story happened, when Jussie Smollett happened, they were very happy to publish all of this fake bullshit because it was anti-Trump. And he was pro whoever they support. The same thing, you mentioned Charlottesville earlier. There's still this massive hoax that Donald Trump said that there were good people on both sides. The Nazis were good and the anti-Nazis were good. Actually, he didn't say that at all. He said that the Nazis should be condemned absolutely and made it very clear that when he was talking about good people on both sides, he was referring to people who were there protesting about statues being taken down. So they weren't the KKK at all. But they were very happy to share that. And yet the moment that someone on the other side is being attacked through what may or may not be true articles, then they decide to jump in and stop it. So you see the double standard at play.
Yeah, and that's why for me, like I have almost zero trust in the media. And I did see that clip where they cut the clip. Is that something you're scared of? You go on some talk show, you go on, some news channel, and they take a snippet of what you said out of context and just spread it online?
Well, I
That's
don't
something
have Trump's significance or social media following, so I'm a bit less concerned about people doing that to me. But yeah, I haven't really thought about that carefully. I mean, look, I say what I think. I think my views are very sensible and reasonable. If people want to try and misrepresent me, I think the people who follow me and know my views wouldn't really bite for it. And also, I'm coming to the point as well where I think actually those of us who, as you said, get called names that are unfair. We do have laws about libel and slander in the UK. And I think it's time people who've been unfairly treated in that way start using the court system to level the playing field. Because if Douglas Murray makes this point, if I called someone who disagrees with me a pedophile, they would rightly sue me for libel and I'd have to prove in court that I have evidence that they're a pedophile. But if someone calls me a bigot or says that I'm prejudiced or I'm whatever, well, they need to provide evidence of that. Otherwise, again, they need to apologize and withdraw that. So I think people who are being wrongly accused of things by either side online need to start to reintroduce that punitive element that's there in the legal system to say, look, you have the freedom of speech, but you can't just slander and libel people because we have laws against that, and rightly so.
Yeah. I watch a lot, probably too many documentaries, but a good amount of documentaries. And I see, just as an example, the other day I saw the Oscar Pistorius documentary, this extremely sad story. And the thing that keeps repeating in all these documentaries is you see the media and it is just like swarming the courts, right? It'll be outside the person's house. It'll be outside the court, just waiting to get a shot of this poor guy, or the family just walking to the court, walking to his house, just drinking a cup of coffee. And there's thousands of them just killing each other to get one shot. And then they'll post something that he may be this, he may be that, and they'll say something about the family. And they'll just post these salacious headlines to sell magazines, to sell newspapers, to sell clicks on the internet. And it's one of the most frustrating things for me to see. It's just so annoying because it's not real journalism. And they'll sit there for hours, they'll sit there for days, they'll sit there for weeks. And this is what I just see with journalism nowadays. It's more infotainment, emphasis on tainment, less on info. And again, it's one of those things where I don't see this changing. I don't see a 180 where they're like, you know what, we're going back to hard journalism. We're going to give you the facts, regardless of the political aisle, regardless of the ideology. And it's the same thing as social media, where I just think it's going to keep getting worse and worse.
I think you're right that it's going to keep getting worse and worse. I think I guess I maybe push back on a little bit of that, in the sense that I think the media have always been that way. The press has always been obsessed about people's private lives and all of that sort of thing. And it's just human nature. I think we're all sort of curious, slightly pervy, slightly whatever it might be, right? So I think that's sort of one part of it. But in terms of the standard of journalism, certainly what you're seeing is just as the standard of the caliber of the politicians is plummeting, so is the caliber of journalists. The number of principled people who will publish a story that goes against their biases is going down. The number of people who will happily only publish stories that fit their bias is going up. And at the moment, that seems to be the trajectory, which, as you say, is very worrying.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about and again, I guess this kind of goes back to media, but just as an example, you see women now, and this goes back to who you can and can't criticize. And I've seen ads for this. Women are celebrated as queens and as whatever it is. And you'll see this ad for a really large, you can call fat lady, right? And you should just call it what it is. You should call it unhealthy. But I've seen I've seen comments and I've seen ads where they're saying that there's no evidence for being that fat correlates with being unhealthy. That if you're obese, that doesn't mean you're unhealthy. And we're just living in this upside down, fact-free zone where it's completely ridiculous. And this obviously applies to a lot of different things, but I just feel like this one is extremely irresponsible. Like, if you're telling people like, hey, just because you're fat doesn't mean you're unhealthy, that's extremely irresponsible.
It is. And it's part of this whole idea that everything is subjective, man. Like, there is no truth. It's all relative, man. Like, everything is just the way you perceive. It's all about your lived experience, man. And if you feel healthy weigh 200 kilograms, well, that's just, that's how you feel, man. And that, whatever. Look, non-judgment, I think, is a good policy. Generally, I don't think we should judge people as much as we can, although, of course, that's impossible. We all judge each other all the time. But I don't think, people who are overweight should be attacked for their weight. But telling them that it's healthy is not helpful to them. It's not helpful to our society. And it's all part of this thing. Like, if you feel something, that matters a lot more than objective reality. And that's a thing that's been happening for a while, and it will continue to happen. It has a lot of negative consequences. I mean, take the issue of transitioning, for example, of people who are trans. You are seeing now, we just had a case here in the UK, a young woman who was encouraged to transition as a child, because it's all up to you, man. It's just how you feel, right? If you feel at the age of 11 that you're the opposite sex, well, hey, let's just, give you puberty blockers and drugs and cut off your, whatever it is. And you're going to now start to see, and this is the future, a lot of people detransitioning, saying, hey, why on earth did you let me take body and mind altering drugs and surgery at the age of 11? We don't let people drink, smoke, drive, have sex at that age. How on earth is a person with an underdeveloped brain, which is what everyone is at 11, qualified to make those decisions? And you're going to start to see a lot of people who've been encouraged into this. Well, if you feel this way, well, let's get the knife out and start, lopping things off. You're going to start to see a lot of people coming back on that and going, You encouraged me to basically maim myself when I was a kid, and pushing back against that, suing people. You're going to start to see a massive wave because this shit has consequences.
Yeah, especially with kids. I mean, as an adult, you can, you take certain actions and then you're going to have to live with those actions. But if you're a kid and you're 11 years old, I mean, when I was 11, Jesus, dude, I didn't know left from right. There's no way I could have made this probably the most important decision I'll ever make at 11. Right. And this wasn't around back in the day. And yeah, now if you're a tomboy, they're essentially telling you, hey, go switch because you're probably a boy. You shouldn't be a girl. And you're so malleable at that age. You're like, oh yeah, I probably am a boy. You start thinking that, right? You hear what people are saying and you start to thinking like, yeah, that's probably what I am. I didn't think of it that way, but that's what maybe I am. And then you start doing this, and then that's really depressing. If I look at sports specifically, when I see trans athletes go and compete, and they should compete, like they should definitely, you should be the best version of yourself that you can be. But we have to figure out how maybe they have a sports league of their own or whatever it is, because if you see them against other women, dude, these guys are just smashing them. It's not even close. They're just obliterating them. And I feel so bad for these women who've put in so much time, so much effort. They've worked their whole lives, right? And then they go in competing. It's kind of like if I put someone in MMA who's a 145er against a 205er. It makes no sense. That's why you have divisions. And there was a recently one in Idaho where this guy, trans, and he was just, I think it was track and field, demolishing these girls, just obliterating them.
Well, it's what we've really done is essentially a few years ago, we all jumped out of a window and we were on the 10th story and we were flying down going, oh, this is fine. There's no problem. Look, I haven't crashed. No, why are you saying this is dangerous jumping out of windows? I'm flying down. And now what you're starting to see is the reality of the ground coming up to smash us in the face. And it's happening in women's sports. It's happening, as I said, with detransitioning. Obviously, people who are obese and think that they're healthy, by the time they get to 40, 50 years old, they're going to find out that that's all BS. And no matter how progressive the doctor is, he's still going to tell them that they've got diabetes, etc. Diabetes isn't very progressive that way. It doesn't really care what your politics are. So you're going to start to see that on a lot of other issues too. The reality of the ground smashing us all in the face.
And I mean, what are we going to do when, let's say, a guy says, I'm female. I would like to go to a all female high school or to a female to prison for females, right? Instead of men.
We've had a case like that in the UK. Someone who claimed to be a transgender woman, still had a penis, went into a women's jail and raped several women.
Really?
Yep. Karen,
wow.
The case, the person is called Karen White. Look it up, man. And that's innocent women. I mean, they're in prison, but innocent in you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Through no fault of their own, being raped for the sake of this ideology, for pretending that just because you feel something makes it real.
How do you see this playing out? I mean, like I said, there is a lot of movement on the left, but is it everyone on the left? Is it just a faction? Is it what percentage is it, and how? I don't know, how much do you see the goalpost moving towards a point where we're just in Looney Tune worlds?
Well, it's hard to know because it really depends on how the election plays out and all sorts of other factors. There is some debate even about whether these people are on the left at all. The sort of what I earlier referred to as the far left. A lot of people on the actual left who care about, workers' rights, the working class, jobs, the economy, all that sort of thing, and not all that invested into all this cultural bullshit, they would say these people aren't on the left, right? We've had numerous guests on Triggernometry who've made that very same point, who are on the left, who say these people aren't the left. They're what you might call, quote unquote, liberals, right? So there's some debate about that. But the only way this is going to end is if the pendulum swings back the other way. And I just hope that it starts to swing back soon, because if it continues to go in the wrong direction, then the swing back is going to be very, very hard. And it will then overswing in the other direction, which is what almost always happens. And that worries me as much as the direction of travel now is how hard will the pendulum swing back? And are we actually going to start to see people coming to power in politics and elsewhere who genuinely have reactionary views, who want to, cancel gay marriage, who want to fucking send you to prison for 20 years for taking drugs, who want to not allow people who have genuine gender dysphoria, who need to transition, they're not allowing any of them to transition, who want to, put women back in the kitchen and all of that sort of stuff. Right. And that is historically what tends to happen when you go too far in one direction. The pendulum swings back too far and you just keep swinging like that. So that's why I've been advocating for a more sensible, moderate view, because I think staying in that sort of moderate middle ground is a much healthier way for society to progress. Whether that happens, we will see.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why it's so important for people to speak up, because otherwise people will just think that the mob that makes the most noise, the loudest one in the room essentially is the one that's right. Because if you don't have, just for example, if you take Sam Harris, right, after I think 3 months ago or something, he put out a podcast just by himself, no guests, no anything. And he talked for about an hour and a half about a subject that technically him as a white guy in America shouldn't be talking about. And he really dug deep and statistics and analysis, and he gave his opinion, and it was beautiful. It was a masterpiece, really. And I just think that there's a problem now that if you're a certain gender or a certain color or a certain whatever, like, you can't speak about topics. And that's the most frustrating part. Like, and I got into a bunch of arguments where I'm like, you know what? I don't even want to talk about these things anymore because it's not worth it. I just get into arguments with people because they're not able to have a civil conversation about these hot topic, trigger warning topics, whatever. And I just love that he came on, and he's been doing this for years, so he's immune pretty much at this point. But I just loved how he just broke down the whole thing in a beautiful way.
I think I know the one you're talking about, and it was indeed great. And I agree with you as well that I think it's important people are able to speak about stuff irrespective of their race. I mean, I do remember some guy called Martin Luther something talking about this very thing, that people shouldn't be judged on their skin color. They should be judged on the content of their character. That seems like a good idea. Maybe we should adopt that. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? So I guess final question, if I can play, devil's advocate. The mainstream is changing, right? Mainstream, I don't think people are listening to CNN and Fox News as much as they are to Joe Rogan or Sam Harris, or I don't know, maybe even Dave Rubin. Could it be, when we talk about people getting canceled, does that even matter anymore when you have your own platform, when you can go on a Joe Rogan's not getting canceled, right? Like, he can say whatever he wants. Spotify's not canceling him. No one's canceling the guy. And even if they do, he can go start his own Spotify and he's going to be number one, right? Like, that's where he is. So it's like mainstream is changing. And when people say, oh, mainstream media is canceling me, does that even matter anymore? Where we can have, the alternative is becoming the mainstream?
Yeah, I think you're right that sometimes people attempted to exaggerate and overblow the cancel culture issue. And if cancel culture was about attacking famous celebrities and people with a huge platform who only really benefit from being canceled for the most part, it might be personally deeply unpleasant, but in terms of their viewing numbers and whatever else, it actually helps them, then I think that would be absolutely right. The problem is that cancel culture, and we don't hear about it for obvious reasons, also affects ordinary people. And ordinary people are in this country being fired from their jobs and losing their reputations and losing careers because of things that they say. We had a guy who had a job in a supermarket who was fired for sharing a comedian's routine about religion on his Facebook. Stuff like that. There are loads and loads of people who are losing work, losing reputation, losing commissions, losing contracts simply for having the quote unquote wrong opinion. And so I think it's important to remember that this idea that cancel culture only affects the rich and famous or people online with large platforms is wrong. There are a lot of ordinary people, and that's why so many ordinary people feel so strongly about this, because they feel in their own lives exactly like they signed the contract that I was offered at that university, and they live their life under that sort of threat. And that's why they feel strongly about these issues.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, Konstantin, time is up. I want to thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure all mine. Thank you so much for having me, Roy.
Yeah, where can people find you on the internet? Where are the best places?
I'm on those terrible social media platforms. I'm on Twitter at Konstantin Kisin, and my YouTube show, which I co-host with Francis, is at TriggerPod. Trigger as in gun trigger. Your viewers in America will be very familiar with that concept.
No, they know it definitely. And I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes, make it easy for everyone to find. And guys, make sure to check out Konstantin's YouTube, Twitter, everything. He's awesome. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. Take care, man.
You too. Bye-bye.